We think of medieval winters as endless misery-cold huts, frozen fields, peasants shivering in rags, primitive, helpless. But what if they had heating inventions so clever? We're only now rediscovering them. No radiators, no electricity, no thermal jackets. And yet they kept whole families alive. They sealed thatched roofs with clay so the wind couldn't howl through, trapped heat inside stone-lined pits, turned soapstone into thermal batteries, shared warmth with animals under the same roof, built beds that were basically wooden cocoons. These weren't accidents. They were tested survival systems, renewable, efficient, and brutally effective. In this video, you'll uncover 10 lost medieval heating inventions tricks that still work today and might one day save your life. And by the end, ask yourself, were they really the primitive ones? Or are we the fragile ones now? The storm doesn't care who you are. It howls through the valley, rattles the wooden doors, presses its icy fingers through every crack in the wall. In the 14th century, there was no thermostat to turn, no Alexa, make it cozy. If the fire died, life ended. For peasants like Hughes, survival wasn't about comfort, it was about making it through the night. The walls of mud, the roof of straw, the floor of frozen earth, none of it was enough. Without clever tricks, the cold would seep in, hour by hour, until the body simply gave up. But this is where medieval ingenuity shone brightest. They built homes that stored heat. They turned animals into living furnaces. They transformed simple stone wood and clay into survival machines. And now we're going to uncover 7 of those forgotten inventions, 10 heating tricks that not only kept them alive back then, but could still keep you alive today. Hugh had spent most of his winters shivering boots stuffed with straw fingers cracked from hauling water in the frost. So when the monks sent him to deliver firewood to the Califactory, the warming room of a medieval monastery, he nearly dropped his bundle in shock. The stone floor was warm. Actually warm. Not less cold, not just bearable. It radiated heat, like the belly of a sleeping animal. For a peasant who usually froze indoors, this felt like walking on magic. But it wasn't magic, it was the Hippoc System, a Roman invention that lingered in certain monasteries and villas across Britain and France. Archaeologists have uncovered brick pillars and flue channels under ancient floors, showing how fire from a furnace would rush below and turn stone tiles into giant thermal batteries. In Bath, England, you can still see ruins where the floors literally floated on stacks of bricks, like a medieval space heater, but one you could dance on. Scientifically, it's brilliant. Stone and brick have high thermal mass. They absorb heat slowly, then bleed it back for hours. Even when the fire died, the warmth stayed. Compare that to Hughes's neighbors stomping around on frozen mud floors, and suddenly you see why he thought the monks had struck a deal with the saints. And here's the funny part. This is just radiant floor heating, the same luxury people brag about today in their modern cabins. The difference, we use hot water tubes. They used smoke and bricks. And instead of an energy bill, they just needed firewood. And maybe someone like Hughes to keep feeding the furnace. So what do you think? Would you trade your electric heater for a smoke-powered warm floor? Or would you rather keep your toes cozy without the carbon monoxide risk? Drop your answer below. I'm curious who's tough enough to go full medieval. When night fell in the monastery, Hughes dreaded the moment he had to crawl into bed. A straw mattress on frozen ground was less rest and more slow torture. But Hughes had a hack. Before the fire went out, he buried a few smooth river stones deep in the glowing embers. By the time he returned hours later, those stones were still radiating heat like miniature suns. He pulled them out with iron tongs, wrapped each one in rough linen, and slipped them into his bedding. One at the feet, one near the chest, maybe even one under the blanket by his side. Slowly, the icy straw transformed into something that actually felt inviting. For once, he wasn't going to wake up with icicles in his beard. Scientifically, it makes perfect sense. Stone has a high specific heat capacity. It can absorb a lot of energy and release it gradually over time. Archaeologists have even found scorched stones in medieval hearths, suggesting this wasn't just improvisation, it was a practiced technique across Europe. And here's the funny part, we think of this as primitive, but what are electric blankets, hot water bottles, or those disposable hand warmers, if not the same principle, heat storage and slow release? It's physics, not magic. The only real difference is that Hughes didn't have to pay an electricity bill for his bed warmers. He just needed firewood patience and some rocks. So here's the question, would you try sleeping with hot stones in winter if the power went out? Or would you stick with your plug-in blanket? Drop your answer below. I want to see who's brave enough to go full medieval. Hugh ducked into a timber house in a Norse village and immediately started coughing. The entire room was hazy smoke curling upward and clinging to the beams like a dark ghost. At first he thought, this is insane, why don't they just build a chimney? But then he noticed something else. Despite the snow, outside the loft, under the roof, was warm, warmer than any peasant hut he had ever slept in. This was no accident. Many wooden houses in Scandinavia and Northern Europe during the Middle Ages were built without chimneys. Fires burned in open hearths, and instead of letting heat escape, the smoke lingered under the rafters. Archaeologists have found soot-blackened ceilings in medieval longhouses, evidence that families used the loft area not just for storage, but as a smoke-heated sleeping platform. Scientifically, it's a clever form of a hot air trap. Warm air rises, collects under the roof, and keeps that space toasty. Yes, your eyes water and your clothes smell like a campfire forever, but your body doesn't freeze. For Hughes, that was a trade worth making. And here's the funny twist today. People pay extra for heated attics, insulated loft conversions, and even infrared saunas. Back then, peasants got all of that for free, just with the side effect of coughing like a chimney sweep. So the punchline is simple. Medieval Scandinavians basically invented the world's first smoke sauna. Now tell me, if it kept you alive, would you sleep in a smoky loft, or would you tough it out on the frozen floor? Drop your thoughts below. I'm curious who'd pick lungs full of smoke over toes full of frostbite. When Hughes visited the great monastery at Cluny, he discovered a miracle that had nothing to do with prayers. The monks called it the Califactory, literally the warming room. Inside, rows of stone benches lined the walls, and when he sat down, he nearly jumped back up. The seat was warm, not from a blanket, not from sunlight. This was stone radiating heat. For a man used to icy wooden stools, it felt like holy intervention. The trick was simple, but brilliant. Fires were built in adjoining rooms or chambers, and the thick stone walls and benches absorbed the heat like thermal batteries. Over hours, they released warmth, evenly turning cold stone into radiant heaters. Archaeological studies of Cluny Abbey confirm that monks gathered here to read and write in the only heated space of the complex. Imagine studying scripture for hours in a freezing monastery. Without this system, even ink would freeze on the page. From a scientific angle, it's just thermal mass at work. Dense materials like brick and stone store energy and release it slowly. Today, we use the same principle in heated benches at ski resorts or radiant stone walls in high-end spas. Different technology, same comfort. For Hugh, it was like sitting on a medieval version of a heated car seat. Sure, it took hours to warm up, but once it did, you didn't want to get up. So here's the punchline. Sometimes the monks didn't need to preach to keep people in church. They just needed warm benches. Now your turn. Would you sit through a 3-hour sermon if the pews were heated? Comment below. I bet more of us would suddenly find religion. When Hughes traveled north into Scandinavia, he discovered a survival trick that made him raise an eyebrow. People and animals under the same roof. Step into a longhouse in the 14th century, and you'd see it humans at one end, cattle at the other, with only a wooden partition in between. At first glance, it looked like chaos. The smell, let's just say it wasn't lavender, but the heat, unmistakable. Here's the science. A full-grown cow gives off roughly 500 to 1,000 watts of heat just by existing. That's like having a space heater that moves. Multiply that by half a dozen animals, and suddenly your drafty timber house feels less like an icebox and more like a sauna. Archaeologists in Norway have uncovered longhouses with clear signs of animal stalls built into living spaces, confirming that this wasn't desperation, it was deliberate design. From a physics perspective, it's communal heating. Instead of isolating body heat, you pool it together. Modern survivalists talk about shared body warmth in tents. Medieval peasants just leveled it up with livestock. Sure, your blanket smelled like cow by morning, but you woke up alive. Today, we do the same thing, just with fancier tech. Apartment blocks, district heating, even co-working spaces in winter, the principle is identical. Share a heat source, reduce energy loss. Only difference, no mooing. So here's the punchline. Medieval peasants literally turned cows into central heating units. Now tell me, if the power went out tomorrow, would you rather snuggle up to a radiator or a cow? Drop your answer below. I'm curious who's ready to go full living furnace. One winter night, Hughes visited a Viking longhouse and noticed something strange. The central fire had burned down to ash, yet the floor still radiated a soft warmth. Curious, he brushed the dirt aside and found stones blackened and cracked, arranged in a circle. Beneath them, faint red embers glowed like a heartbeat. This was the secret of the stone-lined ember pit. Instead of letting fire die, families raked the coals into shallow pits lined with rocks, then covered them with earth. The stones trapped the heat, releasing it slowly through the floor all night long. Archaeologists studying Anglo-Saxon and Viking sites in England and Scandinavia have uncovered scorched stones buried beneath living spaces, physical proof of this clever heating trick. Scientifically, it's the principle of radiant ground heating. Dense stone absorbs the energy of fire, while the soil acts as insulation. The result, a slow, steady release of heat, basically a medieval version of the Korean ondol system that still exists today. For Hughes, lying on straw above an ember pit felt like cheating death. No smoke in his face, no waking up frozen, just steady warmth, as if the earth itself was on his side. Today, we brag about underfloor heating in luxury homes, but the Vikings were already doing it, just with dirt stones and a lot of patience. Sure, it wasn't Instagram-worthy decor, but survival rarely is. So here's the punchline. Medieval peasants literally slept on a bed of coals and lived to tell the tale. Now tell me, if your heater broke tonight, would you dig a fire pit under your floor? Comment below. I want to know who's bold enough to try the Viking method. Hughes was fascinated the first time he saw a Scandinavian family cook stew in a pot that wasn't metal or clay, but soapstone. To him, it looked like someone had carved a cooking pot out of a mountain, heavy gray, a little cracked around the edges. But here's the magic. Long after the fire was out, the soapstone pot was still warm, radiating heat, like it refused to let winter win. Soapstone or steatite has a very high specific heat capacity, meaning it can absorb huge amounts of energy and release it slowly. Archaeologists have uncovered soapstone cooking vessels and hearthstones across Norway, Sweden, and Finland dating back to the Middle Ages. For families like Hughes' hosts, one hot meal meant not just dinner, but a heat source that kept food edible and the room warm for hours afterward. Scientifically, it's brilliant. Instead of wasting heat, the second the fire dies, the stone becomes a thermal battery. Imagine a medieval slow cooker, except it doubles as a space heater. Sure, moving one of these pots was like deadlifting a cow, but once it was hot, you didn't have to relight the fire every hour. Fast forward to today, and the idea is alive and well. Modern soapstone stoves are luxury items designed to store heat and release it for up to 24 hours. Homeowners brag about how eco-friendly and efficient they are. Hughes would have just laughed. He knew that trick centuries ago. Punchline: medieval peasants had sustainable heating systems before it was cool. So tell me, would you trade your electric kettle for a 100-pound stone pot if it meant staying warm all night? Comment below. I want to know who's strong enough to lift history. Outside, the storm still howls, but inside Hughes' cottage, the cold has been beaten back, not by luck, but by knowledge. A hot stone at his feet, curtains drawn around his bed, the steady breath of cattle warming the air. Even the mud on the roof is doing its quiet work, holding off the wind. This was the genius of medieval survival, 1,000 small inventions, clever tricks that worked with nature instead of against it. No electricity, no gadgets. Just patience, craft, and wisdom passed down through generations. We call them primitive, but really they built sustainable heating systems long before we did. So let me ask you, of these 7 lost inventions, which one surprised you the most? And if the power went out tomorrow, which one would you actually try? Drop your answer below, because the next winter storm may come sooner than you think.